Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
I just heard Simon mention in his bulletin that the Great Ormond Street Hospital have elected to give back money raised at a ball, at a party that is subject to allegations of pretty gross behaviour, but also, I suspect, pretty normal behaviour. There's a danger in the current climate of everything getting a little bit holier than thou. The problem is that if you say that you didn't know stuff like this went on, you leave yourself open to accusations perhaps of naivety. But I'd rather be naive than debauched. But equally, I mean, I'm trying to think what I can sort of offer up to you in a confessional sense that will encourage you to talk to me about this issue. The story's gross. It's supposedly to raise money for Great Ormond Street Hospital, but it's men only, which is already, I'd have thought, in a social occasion, it's something that you would perhaps do a double take at in 2018. It's black tie, 360 figures from business, politics and finance, and entertainment that included 130 specially hired hostesses. Now, I'm such a snowflake. I sort of see a hostess, I see the word hostess, and I think glorified waitress. A waitress who is encouraged to talk to guests. But I don't even know that that's true. I do know that they were all told to wear skimpy black outfits with matching underwear and high heels. But I suppose we should point out at this point that they were all also perfectly free to say no. If that's one of the requirements of doing the job, then I don't want to do it. And then there was an after party at which many of these hostesses, some of whom were students seeking to earn extra cash. You see, I don't know I mean, I stand by what I said about once you've been given the dress requirements, you're free to say no. But there is nothing, I'm afraid, implicit in a dress requirement that says you've also agreed to being groped, sexually harassed and rudely propositioned, which is what the allegations contain. There's a little bit of me that's wondering why I've never been invited to this. I've been invited to some fairly grand events over the years, but I've never been invited to this one. Obviously, I'm not grand enough, because the sort of names that were on the guest list are of a rather higher, perhaps, commercial calibre than mine. So it's been going on for 33 years. It's a pretty big fundraiser, and it's the Financial Times who find themselves in the unlikely territory of doing a sort of News of the World style sting. I don't know whether they made their excuses and left, but I do know they sent 2 people to work undercover as hostesses. Reporters also gained access to the dining hall and surrounding bars. 6-hour event. Many of these hostesses were subjected to groping, lewd comments, repeated requests to join diners in bedrooms elsewhere in the Dorchester. They also reported men repeatedly putting hands up their skirts. One said an attendee had exposed his penis to her during the evening. Remember, these are the most powerful and influential men in Britain, among the most powerful and influential men in Britain. So if I sound naive, that's fine. But if this was the sort of behaviour that was going on at perhaps a 1990s Premier League footballing Christmas party, I would be less shocked. The WPP, the advertising conglomerate, sponsored a table. Chief Executive Martin Sorrell was not present this year, but that's the kind of character who has appeared here in the past. And I want to say something at this point. There must have been, and in many ways they're the men I'd rather talk to, because if you were trying to stick your hand up a poor woman's skirt, I doubt you're going to give me a ring and wax lyrical about it. This is fascinating to me, because oddly, I was talking to my little girl last night about the Harvey Weinstein thing that she'd picked up. She's getting older now, so she picks up news stories, and she was asking why it took so long to come out. And I explained to her that it's linked to 2 things. It's A, the power that he wields over the women that he has abused and assaulted, allegedly. But it's also because to complain is to end your career. That seems to be clear from a lot of stuff that we've read. But it's also strength in numbers. So if you could somehow... It's why that scene in Spartacus is so powerful, isn't it? I am Spartacus. See... They're trying to find Spartacus so they can crucify him. No spoilers, it doesn't end well. But they're trying to find Spartacus so they can crucify him. And there's a whole crowd of slaves. And they say, where is Spartacus? If you don't reveal yourself, we'll kill everyone, or something like that. It's a while since I've watched it. So Spartacus is about to cough to being there because he doesn't want any innocent people to die. But someone else stands up and says, I am Spartacus. And then someone else stands up and says, I am Spartacus. Until loads of people are standing up saying, I am Spartacus, which theoretically means that the tactic could work. But you need everyone. If you were the only person, if you weren't Spartacus and you stood up and said, I am Spartacus, and no one else moved, you're just going to get yourself killed. Full stop. That might be a noble act of sacrifice, but it's you know, it's pretty bad news for your mum. And that's the other reason why the Weinstein thing festered for so long, because unless a huge number, unless you could somehow assemble numbers of comparable power to Weinstein's status, you couldn't really challenge him. So I tried to explain, it's sometimes very helpful trying to explain complicated or troubling moral issues to your children, because she got it. And she was like, okay. So then she asked the names of the ones that had come forward first. And so I said, well, there was an actress called Ashley Judd in those. And that's how it happened. You need somebody who's got the guts to call it out. So I'm pretty sure there were lots of decent men at this party who are just as disgusted by what went on there as lots of people who weren't there are disgusted reading about it. And I have sympathy for them, because I've excused myself from situations, but I haven't extended that to a condemnation of everybody else who stayed. My stag night would be the funniest example of this, where I was pretty slaughtered in the small hours of the morning, and one of my old mates from I suppose you'd call a rather fast set that I used to knock around with had an interest in one of the smaller lap dancing clubs in Soho. And one or two, but not all of my friends, thought it would be very funny to arrange a sort of assignation in a back room at this club, at which point I genuinely did. Oh, you're going to laugh at me now, but I hadn't known my wife very long at this point, and she was out with some of her friends elsewhere in the West End, and we're my mates, and it was all done in fun, and no one was cross with me for saying no. But when I found out what my mates were up to, I kind of called time on it and went to meet my then fiance, and went home together. I don't want to do it. It's nothing to do with morals or religion or I don't know what you'd call it. It was never for me. I used to go to Stringfellows occasionally as a guest of the owner when I was on newspapers, and it was odd. I mean, what they're selling is the idea that these women who take their clothes off while dancing in front of you are somehow interested in you, and you continue to give them money. Stringy used to give us Stringfellow dollars when we got there. He used to every now and then have a table for journalists and media people, and it was fun. And I was a kid, and there's an element of Bond type film to it. You know, these incredibly good-looking women who are at first glance treating you like royalty. But again, for me, and I'm not judging anybody else because the women are there completely consensually. Some of them make a fortune. I must have told you the story about the one. I'll tell you it in the course of this hour. So I could move myself from that situation, but I'm not going to condemn anybody else for staying in it. It's all consensual. If you're sitting with colleagues or friends or contacts, and some of them start trying to proposition young women who are there to work, and some of them start to touch inappropriately, and some of them start to put hands up skirts, then you've got a problem. Because if you call it, you might lose. I know this sounds silly, but it's so important, it seems to me at the moment, to try to see the world from other perspectives, rather than just defining your own perspective and then taking pot shots at everybody else who doesn't see the world as you see it. I mean, what if it was your boss? Are you going to call your boss out for being disgusting? I just don't think you are. And hand on heart, I don't think I could if I was working in that kind of environment. So you're on a table that probably someone else has paid for your ticket, because that's generally how these things work. What am I saying? I don't know. Am I saying I feel sorry for these men? God, no. My sympathy is reserved entirely for these women. But I'm also saying we need to know a little bit more about this world, don't we? David Walliams was the host for the evening. Nadeem Zahawi, the newly appointed Under-Secretary of State for Children and Families, was there, or at least he was on the list. So was Jonathan Mendelsohn, a Labour peer and party fundraiser. It is not clear whether those listed all turned up on the night, but the list also includes the head of Barclays Investment Bank's Middle East business, the founder of a hedge fund called Duet Group. Patrons of the event include Bernie Ecclestone and Vernon Kay. What's he doing there? Anyway, I digress. What's the question then? It's just grim. I want to know how commonplace it is. When I first started on the Express, one of my mates on the sports desk got invited to what they used to call a gentleman's evening at a nearby subterranean wine bar. And when I saw him the next day, he genuinely looked as if he'd spent the night sleeping in a graveyard. I mean, the man was still pale. And this was a very generational issue. This was men in their 40s, 50s and 60s, and me and my mate were in our early 20s. And also, when I first started working in that part of London, some of the pubs still had strippers at lunchtime, you know, and maybe they still do. And we just didn't know much about that world. And he was chilled to the core because he'd been told there'd be a stripper, but he hadn't been told that the stripper would also, you know, do sexual acts for money. And they all thought it would be hilarious to get her to try to do one to him. And he was quite freaked out by it. The world has changed. This is going back 20 something years. But actually looking back now, the way the world is changing, you can't help wondering how that would have played out had the genders been reversed and it was a young female member of staff being set upon by a male stripper who'd been paid money by her colleagues to embarrass her in front of everybody else. So I'm not blimmin' naive, but I am disgusted. How does this stuff happen? You go to these parties, and I'm not going to beat you up for not calling people out. I am going to beat you up for groping women, if you're prepared to admit to that. How does it happen? And I suspect that a lot of the answers are going to have to come from either people that have worked these kind of rooms or ended up there almost by accident. If you were a hostess at this party, like this charity fundraiser, it's called the President's Club Charity Dinner. Obviously, we're going to have to take you at your word, so if you want to say that it's nowhere near as bad as some of the reports suggest, or if you want to confirm some of the reports that suggest it, we'll take you on trust. But I would love to hear from you. 0345 6060973. Presumably, the agencies that book staff for events like this are the same agencies that send seasonal staff to places like Wimbledon. I mean, could anybody have ended up there even with the dress request? Yeah, of course you could. And within 10 minutes of arriving being absolutely outraged. Give me anything you've got on this. I've been to some smart parties, but I don't think I've ever been to an exclusively male smart party like this. So double thinking. I don't want to fall foul of the government's new fake news department. I'm pretty sure that I've never been to... So this is what the world looks like, is it, when there aren't any women present who the men consider to be their equals or their peers? Give me a ring and just talk to me, actually, on this one. I'm not going to ask you a specific question. Just talk to me about what you know about a world in which very, very rich and powerful men assemble without any women who aren't on the payroll, and how they subsequently behave, and how you behaved when you found yourself caught up in the middle of it. 17 after 11 is the time. 0345 6060973. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through, and I suspect that you're going to be able to get through for the whole hour. You couldn't get through after the first 10 minutes of the last hour, but this one, I don't know how many people listening are going to be able to contribute, and among those who can contribute, I don't know who will. I hope you will, because it's gross, this story. One of the prizes, it almost goes without saying, was lunch with Boris Johnson. And for balance, also tea with Mark Carney. So, yeah. What would you like to say about this sort of event? Because it makes my blood curdle. It is... Oh, I don't know. I completely recognise that everybody has the right to do whatever they want. But some of these stories here, even the woman that was booking the hostesses has made them sign a 5-page agreement when they arrived at the Dorchester. I haven't found evidence, as one of my regular contributors has claimed, that they had to sign a pledge not to make any legal noise about sexual harassment or anything like that. But then I haven't seen the 5-page document. I just don't think, if you were in your early 20s and a student, even if the person at the agency said, oh, it's a Marmite job, some girls love it, and for other girls it's the worst job of their life and they will never do it again, you just have to put up with the annoying men, and if you can do that, it's fine. I can't imagine anybody turned up for the first time expecting it to be like this. One of the prizes, plastic surgery with the invitation to add spice to your wife. This is how these men see the world, isn't it? Wives are like chattels. A few of you are pointing out that we possibly deserve should give some more sympathy and understanding to the guests, because it was called the President's Club dinner, and maybe they thought it was an invitation to behave in exactly the same way as the President of the United States has boasted about behaving with regard to women, grabbing them by the genitals uninvited. But I think you're being a little bit glib. Oh, man, I haven't got a question. Don't know what I'm talking about. I've given you the details. We're talking about a story, and I'm saying, what do you think? I've got no females on the line yet. I don't know what that means. Just thought I'd tell you. 0345 6060 973. Am I just completely daft on this? Is there anyone around my age or younger thinking, come on, James? Come on, James, lighten up. It's just a bit of light groping. I hope not. Luke's in Todmorden. Luke, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, good morning.
Hello, mate.
I've been to a couple of parties that are quite high-end,
Yes.
with the kinds of people that you're talking about.
Yeah, men only, though. Men only parties.
No.
See, I don't know. I'm fascinated to hear what you've got to say, but I have as well. It's not a kind of competitive sport, but I've never been to a men only one, and I've never seen anything like this. Presumably you have, otherwise you wouldn't have rung in.
Yeah, well, I don't know if I'd enjoy a men-only party so much, because...
Well, it's not men only, is it? There are women who are there's women paid to sit at your table and pretend that you're interesting and fascinating, which is presumably what their wives have to do the rest of the time.
But the reason I find it is because I've been to one where I sat and experienced what I would say was just out-and-out abuse of a waitress, and then a couple of years later I worked at a very similar event where I learned why the waitresses were there in the first place and how that had happened.
Yes.
But the first one, I used to be in the youth wing of a major political party, and there was a lot of MPs there and high people. I sat with a racehorse trainer, largely unsuccessful, who... He ordered a whiskey from a waitress, and when she came back, she'd bought him a glass of whiskey.
Yes.
And he absolutely went mad at her because he'd wanted an entire bottle. Because he'd paid a lot of money for the tickets, and the drinks were free. You know, he could have had as many as he wanted. He reduced her to tears in front of the people. It was an all-male table.
And how did the other males respond? How did the other males respond to this?
Well, I went to challenge him. Admittedly, I was a lot younger. And
good for you. I can't say that I would have done. I hope I would, but you did.
Well, I just said, come on, mate. Go easy.
Yeah.
Well, I've always worked in catering, so I kind of understood that side of things.
Yes.
Just a come on, mate. Come on. But everybody else themselves just sort of looked back down at their dinners and just continued to eat.
What's that about? There's a psychological name for it. I think, is it bystander syndrome or something like that? But theoretically, when you break the seal, everyone else at that point does what they really want to do but couldn't quite muster up the courage to do. It didn't happen in your case. Everyone else stayed stum.
Everyone else stayed stum, and then, admittedly, I did as well. It was like a sense of shame descended on the table, apart from this one guy who looked rather pleased with himself. Did he? Like a good thing. Not long after that, to be honest, he got up and went and joined some other people. So, and then we all got up and started dancing and stuff.
Sure.
So the whole incident just got forgotten. But I guess the bad side of that is that he's gone away thinking, well, nobody challenged me, nobody was bothered.
Yeah.
It was a bit uncomfortable, but they all just got on with it. So I guess in his mind, that's perfectly reasonable behaviour.
I don't know what to say, Luke. I'm a bit worried. It's 27 minutes after 11. I've laid out my stall on this one. People are ringing in, all men at the moment, which worries me slightly. And how do we divide the world? No one's going to ring in and say, I'm on the side of groping women, and if I've paid my money... They might feel like that secretly, privately. They might behave like that publicly, but they're not going to ring me and admit to it, are they? No, of course they're not.
I would have thought so, but my concern with this story is that there will be people who are thinking, well, they kind of signed up for it, you know, when it became apparent they had to wear a certain uniform.
Do you know, I'd have laughed at that. A couple of years ago, I'd have said, no, come on, there are some stories we can all at least agree, but this, you've seen it with Trump, this idea that rich and powerful men should be allowed, as he believes, to do whatever the hell they want. I tell you what, start the clock now before one of the professional sort of controversialists of the female persuasion claims that the women who attended this are somehow responsible for what happened to them. There'll be a Daily Mail columnist before the day is out, won't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And they'll probably say the women were empowered and should feel wonderful they're able to use their bodies in such an influential way.
Well, I agree with what you just said, except not like this. Women should be free to do whatever the hell they want with their bodies. But if they're unhappy about having their bodies groped in return for a 150 quid shift... And that's the point that I'm discovering now in life, actually, is that there is an echelon of power that is almost unimpeachable. There are private deals done. Why do you think the owner of the Express and the owner of the Daily Mail never publish stories about each other? Simple. They have a non-gentleman's agreement not to do it. The rest of us, we're chaff. We can be done with whatever they please. But there is this level of plutocrat that just seems genuinely to subscribe to a very 19th century worldview. And, of course, Brexit means they're probably going to get it back soon. Luke, thank you. 0345 6060973 is the number that you need. One woman, and it was a good piece of work by the Newsnight journalist. One of them was by the Financial Times journalist. One of them was on Newsnight last night, confirming that claim about the non-disclosure agreement. Another who had experience of hostess work said this was very different to previous black tie jobs. At other events, men would occasionally try to flirt with her, but she had never felt uncomfortable or indeed frightened. She reported repeatedly being fondled on her bottom, her hips, her stomach, her legs. One guest lunged at her to kiss her. Another invited her upstairs to his room. And remember, the agency had told these women that they were there to help the men have a good time and to fetch them drinks and the like when they wanted it. Quite how the men got the idea that they'd paid money to empower them to behave like this, I do not know. Have you ever been in a room that's turned feral? And I don't know why, but I think I'm indulging in a little bit of inverse snobbery here. I'm more shocked that it would happen in a room full of ostensibly educated men, civilized men. But that's me being an idiot, isn't it? Yeah, I apologise for being an idiot. You might want to make a note of that. I don't think it'll ever happen again. One society figure who the Financial Times has not yet been able to contact was confronting at least one hostess directly at the end of the evening. Remember, these will be sober journalists who are there to report while pretending to hostess. Well, doing both, actually. "You look far too sober," he told her. Filling her glass with champagne, he grabbed her by the waist, pulled her in against his stomach, and declared, "I want you to down that glass, rip off your knickers, and dance on that table." Now, I'm conscious that this may be making me sound like some sort of shadow dweller. I have been to debauched parties, but they were not men only. And this model seems to involve the only women being in the room being on the payroll, and men who've left their wives at home. I don't quite get it. I know that feral behaviour sweeps a room like a virus. I know that, for example, the madness of crowds is a well-documented psychological phenomenon. I know that in the context of football hooliganism, men who wouldn't ordinarily say boo to a goose feel their blood rise and end up rampaging through the streets of a foreign town, smashing up hostelries and intimidating citizens. And then they wake up the next morning. This happens to friends of mine. They wake up the next morning, they can't quite believe what they've done. And that may well be what's happened here. A lot of these men may have woken up the next morning and couldn't quite believe what they've done. But it seems to me that if you see one man doing it, it creates a domino effect in that lots and lots of other men are doing it. And whenever we talk about feminism and we get those well-meaning but ludicrous comments from women who are often a little bit older but not always, that you somehow have to roll with it, or this has always gone on, or I was flattered when my bum used to get pinched. And I've taken those calls, and I've been a bit short with the women who've said it. But it was only when Catherine Deneuve intervened on the Me Too campaign a couple of weeks ago that I understood what has happened. The male-dominated culture has groomed generations of women to think that they have to put up with this rubbish. That's what's happened. Even really successful and powerful women, like Catherine Deneuve, have been groomed to believe that they have to put up with this from men, and they don't. So the converse of that, of course, is the men believing that they're allowed to. And I am shocked. I would like to talk... The Wolf of Wall Street, Dave reminds us, is a very good example of this, but it's set quite a long time ago, Dave. He adds, unfortunately, this vile behaviour has been culturally acceptable among powerful men for decades, and the power seems to me to be the most pertinent element of this story. So, by all means, claim that the women are somehow responsible, or that there is... there are good people on both sides, as the president would no doubt do. But allow me the right to call you crackers. The only circumstances in which a man can touch a woman intimately is when the woman has invited him to do so. It's not difficult. 0345 6060973. I don't get this story, and I don't like it, and I want your help in possibly feeling a little less disturbed by it, but I doubt that's going to happen. If you're not shocked by it, but you are disgusted because of your experiences, I'd love to talk to you, just from any angle you want. How does it happen? How does it feel in the room? 0345 6060973. And what you have to remember is that this is an annual event, and the massive majority of the men who are there are going to buy a ticket next year. So there isn't that much of a kind of buyer's remorse or hangover regret. And that line there, I can't wait until the Financial Times get hold of this character, because they obviously know who he is, and I hope his wife finds out. I really do. I don't know why men behave like this. Is it because they can't talk to women normally? Is this where that weird misogyny comes from that you see all over the internet at the moment, and you see it in the editorial policies of newspapers like the Daily Mail? Old men who can't talk to women suddenly have so much money and power that they can communicate with women in the only way they know how, by exercising their power and spending the money and demanding a kind of acquiescence. It's breathtaking. And then, of course, they get to pay women to write columns about why we should blame women. Best paid women in British media are the women who routinely write about how awful other women are. Daryl's in Birmingham. Daryl, you better interrupt me before I start crying. What would you like to say?
Just to carry on the theme of them leaving the wife at home and going to these things. So, first off, this is a story that goes back 10 years. I'm going to make very clear this was 10 years ago.
Sure.
10 years ago. My wife is a very successful commercial director for a building services company.
Yeah.
I'm a moderately successful group supply chain manager for a different building services company.
And clearly very, very comfortable in your own skin and with that situation, which is lovely to hear. Yes.
Incredibly, she's been the driving force behind me actually getting off my backside every morning.
Yes.
But so just to point out that she was further up the food chain than I was.
Got you.
A large national supplier gave me a call and said, "I'd like to invite you to a black tie event in Birmingham. All expenses paid. We'll put you up in the hotel for the night. There's going to be a speaker. It's a comedian. There's going to be a silent raffle. It's all for charity, and there's going to be some really pretty ladies there. There's going to be dancing. There's going to be probably a stripper, and who knows what at the end of the night."
Right.
And
so you knew exactly what was on the table, so to speak.
Well, he was saying this, and I sat there in almost disbelief, and I said, "What are you inviting me to?" He said, "It's a gentleman's night. It's a black tie gentleman's night. It's very high class."
Yeah.
And I was like, "Okay." I said, "You work with my wife's company as well, don't you?" And he went, "Who does she work for?" So I said the name. He went, "Oh, yeah." He says, "I've invited half a dozen guys from there."
Yeah.
He says, "You'll know them." He says, "Oh, you'll have mates there." And I went, "Okay." I said, who have you invited? And he rolled off the names. I said, "They all work for my wife." And I said, I can tell you for a fact, she won't be happy with this. He said, "Oh, well, she doesn't need to know, does she?"
Whoa.
And
that's the thing. That's the Donald Trump thing, isn't it? When these pathetic men try to pass it off as locker room talk. This weird notion that we're somehow all like that secretly.
Well, this is the thing. So I then said, "Look, I'm going to cut the conversation short now. I'm not interested. In fact, it was 2009. Yeah. So I said, I'm actually pretty surprised you're even asking this, knowing who my wife is, how far up the food chain she is, what she does for a living, my political views. We'd had lots of conversations with this guy. It's not like he was asking me out of the blue."
Sure.
I hung up the phone to him, and I phoned my director, who was a board director, and I said, "Just to let you know, I've just had this absolutely disgusting offer. Yeah. I'm not happy about it, and I want to know what we can do about it." And he went, "Oh, for God's sakes, Daryl, what did you do that for?"
Wind your neck in, Daryl.
Yeah, and he said, "Why did you refuse?" He says, "That means none of us can go now." He says, this is going to cause us a real problem."
Gosh.
And I said, "Hang on a second." I said, "Surely the real problem is that we're being invited to things that are sexually objectifying women in a situation where," and this is the thing, the company I worked for, probably 60% of the people who worked on the ground were women.
And if your man, oddly, and I may have got the wrong end of the stick on this one, but if I've understood, or if you understood what your man was telling you correctly, he was giving you the impression that the women in attendance would be fully aware of what was on the agenda.
Oh, yeah.
And so in which case it becomes considerably less offensive than what we're discussing here. Arguably.
I still found it just as offensive.
No, of course you did. Of course you did. But I'm seeing it from the woman's point of view. If they've gone into it with their eyes open, then although the behaviour of the men is reprehensible, the power dynamic is somewhat different from how it would be if you turned up thinking you'd be serving drinks and found yourself being pulled into some man's lap.
I do wonder, because there's the hostesses who do the drinks, and he said that, there'll be lots of pretty girls handing out drinks, and then there'll be strippers and others.
Right,
and
others.
My worry there was, well, who's to say after a man's had a couple of beers, he's going to even be able to distinguish between a hostess who's serving him a drink and a stripper who's there to take her clothes off? I don't think they can.
How the chaps like us... you're clearly a bit more robust. Well, robust, not quite the right word. I think you're possibly just a bit cooler than I am, because you clearly don't feel any compunction at the moment, and you didn't when you talked to your boss, to sort of prove that you're one of the lads. And a lot of men suffer from that need to prove that they're one of the lads. The most secure among us are the ones who feel no such need whatsoever.
Well, I say no to that. In the end, about 6 months later, I actually ended up leaving my position and going to work for my wife's company, because I just couldn't stand it, and I was pretty much ostracised afterwards for it.
There you go.
In terms of, I was seen as a killjoy. I was seen as somebody who was under the thumb of his wife, and
whereas to me,
all of that stuff.
To me, you sound like a man who's completely comfortable with sexual equality. You sound like somebody who's completely comfortable in the company of women. You sound to me like somebody who has respect for men and women alike based upon how they behave and what they do. And I don't know if this is a little bit inappropriate of me, Daryl, but I do increasingly think this is relevant to conversations like this. You sound like a man who's got a full and healthy sex life.
I'm happy with my wife. That's all that
That's same here, mate. And you say, what is wrong with these men?
For me, it was a case of there's a lot of men in positions where women are in higher positions of power than them feel emasculated. I do not feel emasculated at all. But at the same time, if somebody's going to invite me to something where women are going to be objectified, are going to be demeaned, I'm going to say no, not just because I think, my wife won't like that. It'd be simply because it's the wrong thing to do. I wouldn't want to be put in that situation myself. How many of these men would complain about their wives if their wives went to a ladies' evening, would instantly get incredibly angry about the same thing? They would. Well,
we'll find out. I'm going to suggest to the President's Club, if this is not the real reason for the party, that next year they hire exclusively male hosts.
Yes.
We'll just have a room full of men. It'll be lovely. There's nothing to complain about there, of course. I wonder how many wives. Ooh. That would be the Ray Liotta, wouldn't it, Daryl, today? If we got a wife ringing in now saying, I had no idea, my husband got in at 4 o'clock this morning, I haven't spoken. That's what we need, isn't it?
It would be perfect to hear that, because I wonder how many of these men who go to things like this, and it's not just the high-powered WPPs of the world that go to these events. It's absolutely rife in the construction industry. Black tie events happen all the time, but
gentleman's evening is the usual phrase, isn't it?
Yeah. You see, I go to a lot of awards dinners where it is men and women, and they're absolutely fine, and we have a lot to drink and we party, and they're brilliant.
And some people make idiots of themselves, and some people don't, and some people might get off with each other and then think the next morning that they shouldn't have done. But this is about power and money, and this very Trumpian idea that if you've got enough of both or either, then you can do whatever the hell you want to everybody else's wives and daughters. I mentioned that from a male perspective, and then of course from a human perspective, if you've got enough money and power, you can do whatever you want to whoever you want. And the weird thing is, the forelock tuggers and the cat doffers who are lining up to agree, the people whose incomes are a fraction of these men's, who are somehow persuaded that they're on the same side of the power breakdown, because they know that given the opportunity, they'd be groping whoever they could left, right and centre. They just dream of the day that they'd have enough power and money to enable them to do so. Be like Daryl. Seriously, it's not tough. Crikey, where's the time going? And where's the story going? It's a horrible piece of reporting. A brilliant report, but a horrible detail contained in this Financial Times report about a party, the so-called President's Club, which invites the most rich, many of the most rich and powerful men in the land to have a bit of a knees up without the inconvenience of their wives and partners and girlfriends. I suppose there'd be some gay men there as well, although I don't imagine that their interactions with the hostesses were cause of any concern. I'm interested. I might stay with this until I get what I want. I'd love to speak to somebody whose husband was there and who is absolutely gobsmacked to discover this morning what was going on. It's highly unlikely that anybody came home and said, "Hello, darling, how are the kids? Bedtime all right, was it?" And they said, "Yes, dear. What did you do this evening?" "I've been groping waitresses like it was going out of fashion. Seriously, I've just been at a party at the Dorchester that would have made Caligula blush. I just poured myself a scotch and I'll fill you right in, dear." So that I know it must be tough. And I presume that a lot of these men are married to very powerful women, very impressive women, not just to sort of glorified clothes horses and what have you. But everybody understands the nature of some dynamics. Here, the women didn't understand the nature of the dynamic. I want you to down that glass, rip off your knickers and dance on that table to somebody who really was just a waitress with extra sociable responsibilities. So if your husband was there and you can't quite believe your ears, I would love to talk to you. I suspect that a Ray Liotta might not make the difference between you calling and not calling, but it is there for takes. It's there for grabs. If you decide that that's what you want. 11:53 is the time. Toria or Toria? Toria is in Exeter. Toria, what would you like to say?
I'd just like to say that this is still going on very much with the young girls in our country. My daughter's at university at the moment, and there are agencies contacting her friends who have popular Instagram accounts, offering them modelling jobs, and the more that you agree to, they'll give you free trips to go and see film premieres and all these celebrity parties, and the more that you're prepared to do, the more modelling work you will get.
What do you mean, the more that you're prepared to do? I mean, I know what you mean, but I want to hear it, if you will, undiluted.
The more extracurricular activities you're prepared to partake in with the guests.
Okay, but that's transparent.
Well, that's exactly the same as Harvey Weinstein, though, isn't it? It's pressure and on 21-year-olds.
I see. So they do see it as a career move, or they see it as their career. It's not exactly the same as Harvey Weinstein, because unless I've misunderstood you, what you're talking about is women doing things they really, really don't want to do in return for an invitation to another party.
Yeah, and in return for work and furthering their careers, and I think it's very.
But these girls are waitresses that we're talking about.
Well, you're right, and they're offered work, and of course, when you're presented with actors and famous faces, and you've had to sign a secrecy clause, etc., etc., I think it's harder to say no when you're that age and you're presented with a name that's a household name.
But indubitably, you're right. But I have a friend whose daughter is very active on Instagram, and as far as he's aware, all that it entails is her getting put on guest lists all the time and having sort of the pick of the bunch at clubs, because they want. I mean, it's always been the case, hasn't it? You that's why they let women into clubs free and men have to pay.
Yes.
There is no social occasion without women being present.
Absolutely. I think this one just goes one step further. And it's
10 steps further, isn't it?
Well, we'll take you to LA. We'll fly you out there. We'll put you on the red carpet. We'll get you to meet so and so. You can't say a word ever. This is to go to after parties and just be available. And like
after parties is part of this Financial Times report as well. That's where the most egregious behaviour seemed to unfold.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd be interested to know, and I'm sort of just kind of hazarding a vague guess at your age, given the age that your daughter clearly is.
Yes.
Would you rather be young now, or when? Would you rather be her age now, or when you were?
I'd hate to be a young man now, and I'd hate to be a young lady now.
Why?
Oh, I think there's so much pressure if you say one thing that could be.
No, I'm not talking. I'm not talking about that, because I think that's slightly exaggerated. Right-wing newspapers telling all the time that you can't say this and you can't say that. The best way to do is just to say it and see what happens. But in terms of masculine, in terms of men being predatory behaviour by men, it seems to me that the world is a much better place than it was when Marilyn Monroe, of course, famously described her first Hollywood contract.
I think it's hard for men to date. I think my son would say it's a minefield.
Well, then what advice do you give him? Because I've never found it remotely difficult. I'm 46 years old. I've never kissed anyone who didn't want to be kissed, or touched any woman who didn't want to be touched. Why does he find it difficult?
I think the modern angry woman makes it difficult for young men.
And you tell him this, do you?
No. He would say that to me, and I think predatory men make it harder for my daughters.
I'd agree with the second bit, but I'm confused about why your son wouldn't know what's appropriate and what's inappropriate.
He would know, but I think like some people would say, if you ask for a phone number, I think they get upset at that, and that does happen. You might say it's a right-wing thing, but it's a genuine thing.
But there's no penalty to that. You ask for someone's phone number, they say no.
Of course not, but they're more upset than that. They get more angry than that.
Okay.
I think being young today is really hard.
No, I hear it a lot, and I'm sure you're right. I suspect it always was, and clearly some of the mental health issues speak of a stress and an anxiety that previous generations haven't had to deal with, and pendulums always swing too far after they've started to swing in the right direction. But asking a girl for their phone number, you don't do that. Everyone needs to listen to Mike Skinner. All right, follow Mike Skinner, and you can't go wrong. Listen to the streets. Listen to his advice on how you know whether or not your advances would be welcome. He saw it last night on ITV. And speaking of young people, among kind of their generations, the events at the Dorchester will be almost incontrovertibly awful. It's only when you start talking to older people that you hear strange defences of old men sticking their hands up young women's skirts and somehow arguing that the women either welcomed it, should welcome it, or simply should put up with it. It's a really horrible story, actually. Can we step back from the kind of, what would you call it, the toing and froing, the manufactured, the confected controversy or argument? It's just horrible. And I still struggle to understand that feralness that must have run through the room at some point, because I've spoken since we spoke yesterday to people who've attended these events in previous years. I haven't spoken to anyone who's attended it in the last 5, but they were adamant that it didn't used to be like this. So something's happened. It's almost like there's something in the water, and it led these men to feel not just empowered but actively encouraged to treat these women like what word would you use? How were they treated? I think like objects. Sometimes these words that go around the world and get repeated frequently, we don't pause enough to work out what they mean. So, for example, the word objectify, I've used it without really stopping to think what it means. That's what it means, isn't it? You just treat them like an object. They cease to be a person. And in the context of equality, I think the best way to explain it is you treat someone as if they have fewer rights, fewer basic requirements than you. So it's highly unlikely that any of those old men at that party would be comfortable with having old men shoving their hands down their pants. So they're objectifying the women because they think it's okay to stick their hands up their skirts. That's what really should be done as the acid test of how acceptable this is. You just get a bunch of pervy old men to march up to other pervy old men and start molesting them, and then see how they like it. And yet, there's a few elements to it that I think merit further discussion today. 2 thoughts. I don't know if you heard my cheeky little teaser at 10:45. It did occur to me shortly after coming off air yesterday that if you wanted to make the heads of your average misogynistic bigot explode, then you'd simply tell them that the story's been misreported and actually the room was full of Muslims. Most of the men there were Muslims. It was Muslims sticking their hands up the skirts of these girls. Oh, and the girls were white. Mostly white girls, mostly Muslim, brown Muslim men. And all of these people saying that the behaviour is acceptable or forgivable or to be expected, their tiny little brains would spin into oblivion, wouldn't they? And you'd only be able to tell they were still alive by the steam coming out of their ears. Similarly, the argument that none of the men knew what to expect, but all that the women did, seems to have assumed some currency in the 24 hours since we last spoke about this. And then there is, of course, the suggestion that in the great scheme of things, it's not very important. But I think it is. I have this great privilege of doing my growing up in public. And I am on a crash course with this. I really am. I've let down all the women in my life by having that attitude that most men of my generation have, that this is just the way things are. This is the challenge. That's why I'm going to try not to be too sort of judgmental or critical of people who haven't reached this point yet. This is not the way things have to be. It might be the way things were. It might even in some quarters still be the way things are, but it's not the way things have to be. So when you sort of comforted a younger female colleague back in the day, in your early days on Fleet Street, or your early days in the city, or your early days on the shop floor, or wherever it was, and a younger female colleague said something like, I'm sure that the manager squeezed my bottom when we were having that Christmas photo taken. And you sort of go, oh, it's just a bit of fun. Or you say, well, he was a bit drunk. Or you say, are you sure? Maybe it was, what did Damien Green's friends try to say? Maybe it was the tablecloth. I am guilty of that. I'm guilty of being that person trying to pour oil on the water. Say, oh, come on, you know what he's like. Hansy McDoom, or whatever his name is, Fingers McGlynn, you know, the bloke with the wandering hands. You know what he's like. He'd had a drink. I mean, he didn't go any further. And I was that person. And I'm not going to lie to you. I can't. I've tried. I still am a little bit of me. Not defending it, but subscribing to the school of thought that says that is the way things work. I have obviously nothing but sympathy for women in that situation, but I probably still could and would make a defence of some of the men by saying they didn't realise how bad they were. Do you hate me now? I don't know. I think you've got to be honest about this sort of thing. Otherwise, everything goes black and white, and it's either sort of scorched earth, oh, you can't talk to anybody, you can't do this, you can't do that, or it's the polar opposite, which is what we're hearing today. Oh, it's absolutely fine for men to grope young women, for old men to stick their hands up the skirts of young women because these young women were being paid, or they must have known what was going to happen. But so you start with the mea culpa, I think, for two reasons. Number one, it insulates you from sounding holier than thou. I've never done anything that would be comparable to the behaviour that occurred in this room, but I think I've been an apologist for it, or I would have sought to excuse it in more personal contexts, more private contexts. And that's the problem, isn't it? That brings Catherine Deneuve's comments last week back into the conversation. It brings the female newspaper columnists of a certain age who claim that this sort of behaviour is forgivable, until you suggest that it might have been done by Muslims, in which case they'd all have a sort of collective hissy fit. And that's where I am on this. I'm 46 years old, and I very much grew up in an environment and started my professional life in an environment where the smaller examples of this sort of conduct would have been commonplace. And I've only really recently realised this, because like almost everybody else, I wish I could say everybody else, but I can't. There are always people who are better than you. Like almost everybody else, I thought that things just were like this was the way things were. I really did. And I don't anymore. But it's a slow and difficult process to completely rewire the way that your mind approaches a subject. Call me on this one, talk to me about your thoughts, that's all. I don't want to turn it into, if you don't mind, we might have to, I don't want to turn it into a boo-hurrah debate. You know, I'm on the side of the men who grope women versus I'm on the side of the women who shouldn't be groped, which is what we allow everything to become at the moment in Britain. Everything becomes this ludicrous sort of, you know, United versus City, Rovers versus the Harriers, or whatever it may be. And it isn't. I mean, surely, if we really, really stop and think about it, nobody genuinely thinks that buying a ticket to a dinner gives you the right to stick your hand up the waitress's skirt. Not really. Not in the final analysis. And even if you are clinging to the idea that you do believe that, then I'll do what I did a minute ago, and I'll just change the identity of the woman in the skirt and the man doing the groping. I'll change his ethnicity, perhaps. I'll suggest it's your daughter. I'll suggest it's your mum. I'll suggest it's, you know, somebody from a background that you have framed rather negative thoughts about. Has he got the right to stick his hand up your skirt? All that. You can easily make everybody feel as repulsed and disapproving as everybody should. But for some of us, it takes a little bit more effort than it does with others. I think what would I like to talk to today? I'd like to talk to you, really. Men who feel like they're on a journey, that dreadful phrase. Men who, like me, recognise that, well, I'd like to say that I hadn't been part of the problem, but I had. Men who have grown up in environments, particularly seen their careers develop in environments where other men would do these sort of things, and we would make excuses for them. Including, I'm close to naming him actually, including someone I really liked and respected, who, looking back, I realise I kind of facilitated his lecherous behaviour towards much younger female colleagues. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And I guess we need a slightly more substantive hook upon which to hang our hats this morning, because that was all a bit contemplative and meandering. Please feel free to give me a call and have your own little bout of contemplation and meandering. Give me a ring and tell me that I'm sounding like an idiot as well. I always enjoy that. 0345 6060 973. Forgive me, I'm going to use the G word. I'm going to use the word genitals. And it seems to me that for a man, unless it's your testicles and your penis, you don't really have a concept of physical invasion, do you? It is not the same for a man to feel a woman's arm snake around his waist or snake around his shoulders. It just doesn't make you feel threatened or frightened or terrorised in any way. And similarly, even if you felt a hand upon your buttock, you are unlikely to feel in imminent danger in the way that many, many women, not all, I'm sure, but many, many women would. Or the brush against your breast as a man has his hand around you for a photograph, a group photograph. And there's no male equivalent to that. There's no male equivalent at all. The only thing I think we could possibly begin to grasp is if people actually stuck their hands down our trousers and started sort of squeezing us in an unpleasant fashion. That is the only masculine comparison, it seems to me. And once you've got that processed, I think the rest of it falls into place. So if you've not really thought about this and you're kind of buying into the notion of, oh, it's just a bit of fun, then have a little think first and see if you still want to ring me and explain why this is all a big fuss about nothing. If you are part of this very empowered group of the furiously hard of thinking, and you base your decision of whether behaviour is good or bad upon the ethnicity or the background of the person doing it rather than on the behaviour itself, then you need to have a good look in the mirror today, don't you? But if you're a man who, like me, recognises that doing nothing isn't good enough, that staying quiet but being supportive isn't good enough, where are you today? And how, dare I do this? Talk about painting a target on your back. How does this sound to a woman of a similar generation to me? How do I sound now? Do I sound like a prat? 0345 6060 973. Do I sound like somebody struggling to make sense of this horrible, horrible business? 0345 6060 973. Or possibly, maybe, I sound bang on. I don't know. It's simple, isn't it? I've told you yesterday, I've had lap dances in the past. Does it matter that I never paid for one? Because the woman doing it got money for it off her boss. I used to go to Stringfellows occasionally. I think I went 3 times back in the day when I was a gossip columnist. I met Divine Brown there. Do you remember her? Prostitute that Hugh Grant got caught with. God, I tell you what, if my memory wasn't shot to pieces, I'd write my memoirs. But the experience is so artificial and so weird, but it is a formal experience, that it is a lap dancing club. To go to the Dorchester expecting this kind of thing, I genuinely don't get it. Sexual politics, they are changing. I think clearly for the good, but it's going to be a slow and difficult process. Where are you? Where are you in it? Where are you in that process? I don't know how to pronounce your name. I'm going to have a crack at Assasat. Is that right?
Yeah, it's perfect. Thanks, James.
Splendid. I haven't come across that name before. What can I do for you, Assasat?
Yeah, so I think this is... so I'm in my 30s. I'm 36. I saw a lot of this behaviour in the expat community, when I worked offshore in the oil and gas community.
Gosh.
And I really think a lot of it is about power. And I'd see my colleagues, and then we'd go out in the evening, and the way they treated the local women, and I thought, you would never do this back home. So I don't always think it's about having a lot of wealth. I think it's when you're in a position of power, or when you believe that you're in a position of authority, that you can start having these views of women. But listening today, and what's actually quite scared me is that for people of even in my 30s, is that I've been groomed to believe that these situations, I have to be in survival mode. So I have to distinguish myself from not being like one of those women.
Oh, how do you mean?
because in these situations, they kind of it became polarised. So you're either one of those women or you weren't. And I think the way that my parents or even like my peers have been like, our way of surviving in this sort of the way that it's.
But you are one of those. Which women are we? Who are you distinguishing yourself from? From the
women that they were groping, or from the local.
From the hostesses. So we put them in a category that says, well, obviously, if you put yourself in that position, boys will be boys. But actually, what we do when we do that is we give a free pass to the men in the staff Christmas photo. We give a free pass to the bloke in the lift. We give a free pass to the man who pushes past you inappropriately when you're in the same kitchenette making coffee. All of that, because you can't not be that woman, can you?
Exactly. And then the response is that obviously we're told, be really educated, you wear your pearls, you only laugh at one dirty joke, you don't want to be seen as a feminist. And what I've realised is, in assist survival mode, I'm always on defence. Like when I'm on the tube, I always make sure I have my arms so that my chest is guarded.
Yes.
I like crossbody bags so no one can get to my bum. I'm just kind of realising it's because I've been taught from a little that you have to survive in that situation. Make sure you're not one of the girls that they go for.
I subconsciously, I didn't used to believe some of the statistics relevant to what you've just said. When you read the number of women who report that they've been touched inappropriately or flashed on the tube, or they've been 99.9% certain that the bloke behind them is rubbing himself against them. And I've always thought I'm crikey compared to some of the men that we're talking about in the context of this party at the Dorchester. I'm practically John the Baptist, but I have not believed it. I felt scepticism kick in, and obviously Mrs. O'Brien has been pretty strident over the years about how wrong I am, and I've kind of gone along with it. Do you know what I mean? I've kind of gone, yeah, of course you're right. Yes, you're right. But inside, in my heart of hearts, I've thought it can't be that bad. But it is, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But I think you're right. I think we're all so used to it, and we've all got our roles in it. And now those are being exposed. I think it's good.
So what was your role?
Won't tolerate it.
Your role was like false categorisation. Your role was to say to sort of externalise the idea things like this don't happen to women like me. But internally, you were taking all sorts of measures to protect yourself, from the fact that it does. So that's a form of denial as well, isn't it?
It is, and that's the role. That's the role I was effectively taught by society and through girls' school and through grooming to play. Yeah,
is that it's your job to accommodate their goatishness and take precautions to protect yourself from it. That is exactly the paradigm that is changing, isn't it? No, it isn't. It's men's job not to behave like this. It's not women's job to expect it and cut their cloth accordingly. Thank you, Assasat. What a lovely debut. 25 after 10. Rich, I'm not going to pick on you for this, mate, because I know a lot of people have said it. Rich has tweeted at Mr. James O.B. And you tweeted before Assasat started talking to say, what about hen-dos? Being grabbed loads of times while working, and if you say anything, they say you have no banter and carry on. Yeah, that's not nice. For you, clearly. For a lot of men, they wouldn't feel that the power dynamic had been used against them in the way that you do. But you can't, with a straight face, Rich, think that stands comparison with knowing that you run the risk of being groped or molested every time you're on public transport, every time you're stuck in the lift with a certain character from work, every time that you line up for a photograph with colleagues, older men usually, with the wandering hands. Even the phrases that we used over the years, wandering hands, it's almost poetic. I wandered lonely as a hand, and it's not. Wandering hands is a description of sexual assault. You realised, or you should have realised, when that tape of Donald Trump came out, how deeply embedded in Western culture it is that men are just like that men are allowed to go around grabbing women by the proverbial. And they're not. We're not. We're just not. Simon's in Walsall in the West Midlands. Simon, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm on a journey, Simon, at risk of sounding Californian.
No, I think we all are. I'm the same age as you, James, and I think we both openly met many years ago, or a long time ago. It was kind of the scene. It was seen as a thing you do in the pubs and the clubs, and you would take it as a bit of fun. And it's a bit like the Carry On movies, a bit of slapstick comedy. But I've got a child now, a young girl, and I'm married, and your whole life changed. You couldn't imagine anybody doing that to your wife or your daughter. I think your mindset changes when you get married and have a child. You become defensive about them.
I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to kind of stick you under the microscope. I never would have behaved. I would never have put my hand up the skirt of a hostess or a waitress or I'm 99.9% sure that I never would have sought to pull someone onto my lap who didn't want to be pulled onto my lap. The bloke who said, you know, drink this now, get your knickers off and start dancing on that table. I tell you where I'm guilty. I would have walked away. I wouldn't have talked to him. And there'd have been a little bit of me that could have kidded myself. I was being a feminist by saying, well, she can stick up for herself. She doesn't need me to come galloping to the rescue like Sir Galahad. Do you see what I mean? So we've all got these different degrees of guilt. But I'd like to think that it's not linked to being the father of girls. I'd like to think we would have possibly had this moment of realisation without that personal connection. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think because when you work in offices and you work with women more often, you kind of see a different attitude. You look differently. You think you would never do it with a work colleague, would you?
No.
And I think you start to, when you interact with people more, you think that's not right. And and on a night out, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't go out with a work colleague and grab them and put them on your chair.
Well, I wouldn't, and you wouldn't. But obviously, we've both got colleagues who possibly would. How do we help? Because you don't want to be like sort of made of pipe cleaners, do you? It's got to be a blokey conversation. You can't conduct it in the kind of very effeminate end of the masculine spectrum. So how do blokes like us explain to blokes like them?
It's a quiet word. I mean, years and years ago, in another company, there was a night out and somebody was getting very fresh, and I could have just had a word with him. Just had a word with him, quiet word, and said, do you really think this is right?
Yeah.
Do you think what you're doing is right? And we just calmed him down.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you've got to change them in a polite way. But, you know, people at the drink, they get aggressive. But if you just have a quiet word and say, do you really think she wants this?
Yeah.
Do you think she's enjoying it?
And then you tell the difference between the genuine, I mean, the absolute out-and-out scumbag and the stupid idiot.
Yes. And I think most people regret it. And they kind of sit down and think, yeah, God, they've been at it. And they go and apologise. I think, luckily, I'm not seeing many people who are a bit over-enthusiastic, should we say, and don't take no for an answer. And I think the ones like that, you've got to step in. I think it's a turning point around 2000. I think people start to realise, and this isn't how we should do things now. You know, you've got to stand up for people and make your point in a polite way. And if they don't do the polite way, you kind of have to go a little bit heavier with them. Not in a nasty way, but
I don't know if either of us will find ourselves in that situation, but if you do, mate, get back in touch, won't you? Let me know how it pans out.
Yeah, we'll do that.
We all need new tactics. It's 10:30. Help me, please, writes Dan in a tweet to Mr. James O.B. I find myself totally agreeing with you and your stance on this gentleman's evening. However, when I was younger and in the pursuit of women, I could be accused of being the wandering hands guy that I hate. Does that make me a hypocrite? No, quite the opposite. It makes you honest. It makes you a human being who's capable of changing. And what's the motto of this programme? There's no point having a mind if you never change it. And Guy writes, I stop this kind of conduct by asking them what you would do if it was your sister or mother. The usual response, because we're stereotyping, is I'd knock them out, mate. And this makes them automatically be the bad guy in that room. It normally is followed by an apology. I get that, and if it works, it works, but it's not perfect, is it, to sort of posit, to swap one woman for another in the hope of changing the man's mind. Ideally, you don't want the man to be in that position in the first place, but until we've built this new Jerusalem, Guy's tactics seem to me to be bang on. 10:36 is the time. Christine is in Aldershot. Christine, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi. I think the men involved were sad, but the question I would ask, that if I was one of the girls that was going for the job and I was asked to sign a confidentiality clause,
yes,
to wear skimpy clothes and black underwear, that's assuming that that's correct. I mean, that's what they're saying, aren't they?
Yes.
I think I'd have thought, you know, that job's not for me.
Well, fair enough, yeah. But you wouldn't have thought, if I take it, then I'm telling all these men that they can stick their hands up my skirts and molest me.
No, but I'd be questioning, if I'm serving drinks, why does my underwear need to come into the conversation at all?
It's a valid question. But it's not. But it's not. It's not going to be answered by saying, because by agreeing to do that, you're agreeing to being sexually assaulted. I mean, this is the problem. And forgive me, but I'm going to suggest that you were a young woman in an era where things were a lot worse than they are now, and that there was a sort of sense that if you ended up getting groped, or you ended up getting molested, or you ended up getting flashed at, then this is the era of, you know, she was asking for it, and High Court judges pointing out the length of a rape victim's skirt. Men should never be given a green light to behave like this, whatever colour your knickers are.
No, but you have to be...
Why?
Take some responsibility on yourself.
Why can't men?
Because
so women have to take responsibility for the sexual assaults of men?
Was anybody raped?
I didn't say. No one said rape, Christine.
Guard on the doors, and those women were unable to say, "I'm sorry, but this really isn't for me. I'm off."
Well, they had their phones confiscated, and they wouldn't have got paid if they'd done that. But no, of course there was no armed guard. Let's go back to the question I asked you. Just explain to me why you think women should take responsibility for sex offenders, male sex offenders.
No, I haven't said that at all.
Well, what did you mean when you said women have to take some responsibility?
Why would your underwear come into the conversation?
Yeah, we've covered that. So when you said women have to take some responsibility, what would you go on to say? Women have to take some responsibility for...
Well, for making sure that they keep themselves safe.
From what?
From whatever may happen in the world.
So they are. You do think they should take responsibility for sex offenders?
Somebody now who's apparently got a website going because she was offended because a chap said to her, "Cheer up, love."
Yes, we're talking about women being sexually molested. Why are you talking about a Facebook page?
No. Because
so let's try once more, Christine. Just when you said women have to take responsibility for...
Yes, exactly. You have to keep yourself... There is a degree where you have to keep yourself safe.
From what?
You know, if you go out and get drunk...
From what, Christine?
From whatever might happen to you.
Okay.
If you go out and get drunk...
So women do have to take responsibility for sex offenders.
If you go out and get drunk,
yes,
then you may not be in a position to protect yourself.
Well, that's clearly true for everybody.
World.
Well, it's not a perfect world, but if you want to improve it, then you put the onus of change upon the people... Let me finish, Christine.
Go back to my point. Why, if you're going to be a hostess at a party, at a charity do, would your underwear be part of the condition of you getting the job?
I have no idea. It would suggest a degree of lechery, of ogling, of an ogling nature, and the possibility that someone might get a glimpse of your undercrackers, which isn't something I'd want to be involved in, or something that most women I know would necessarily want to be involved in. But what you've done, and with the greatest of love and respect, what you don't realise you've done is put the onus of responsibility upon the women who are victims of sex crimes. And what you've also done is sort of suggest that a clothing instruction, a uniform requirement, should be seen as a green light to allow criminality.
No, I'm saying...
Well, I did say you hadn't realised.
Women had a choice, and were it me, I would think, hang on a minute, why, as I'm serving drinks, does my underwear play a part in that?
Yes, and it shouldn't, should it?
No.
You should be able to wear whatever underwear you want.
Yeah, but then there's my decision, my responsibility. Do I want that job?
Yes.
Possibly
so here's what you are doing, and you're far from alone. An awful lot of people will be doing this, and it will be partly linked to generation, but not entirely. What you're doing is saying men will always be lecherous, inappropriate, and criminal. Men will always go around grabbing women by the Donald Trump, and you respond to that by telling women that they need to change the way that they behave. That is the conversation we've just had. I fully appreciate that it doesn't sound like that to you, but we've had a conversation about men sexually assaulting women, and you have phoned me up to tell me that women should behave differently. Do you recognise that, Christine?
You have a responsibility to look after yourself.
Yes, we're saying the same thing to each other. It's just that only I can realise it. You phone me up to say, in the context of industrial-scale groping and sexual assault, you phone me up to tell me that women should behave differently.
Women have a responsibility to protect themselves.
Yes, by behaving differently.
Not behaving differently.
No.
I'm saying they had a choice.
Yes, I know. You keep saying that, but the fact of the matter is you've rung me up during a conversation about industrial-scale sexual assault of powerless or less powerful women by very powerful men, and you've decided to ring me up and tell me that the women should behave differently.
No, the other side of this, though, seriously, is there's a danger that somebody, you see, if somebody touches your bottom, I think they're sad, And I think it is a danger when you're calling that a sexual assault.
Yes.
Assault's a very strong word.
Yes.
And I think that then makes it look like, well, rape's a sexual assault.
No, rape is rape. Sexual assault is sexual assault. Molestation is molestation. What you've just tried to argue is that if you prosecute people for punching, then there'd probably be more murders.
No, I haven't said that at all, darling.
All right, Christine. Have a lovely day. Tony's in Gravesend. Tony, what would you like to say?
Having worked in the telecoms industry and at senior positions, Christmas parties and other events were a bit of a nightmare.
Yes.
When the alcohol started to flow, so did the hands and the groping and then the comments and so forth.
And this would be among peers, so to speak. This would be among men and women on the same payroll. This isn't waitresses who've been hired for the night to be the playthings of powerful men.
On the same payroll or above.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And
then sometimes I had to intervene and tell someone that they had to go to bed.
And that was part of your job?
No.
No, so you
I just kind of felt responsible for people that you will work with as colleagues.
Yes.
That you had to make them aware. So going back to an earlier caller that said you had a quiet word.
Yes.
Sometimes it was a quiet word with the actual lady and jump in the conversation and say, you need to go to bed now.
Really?
And she...
I mean, that's not a million miles away from Christine suggesting that women need to change their behaviour to stop men from being perverts.
No, it was... depending on the scenario, you had to... There was either you made the lady move away from the person or you took the gentleman away.
Yes.
It depended on the scenario. But yeah.
Where's your line, Tony? Because I've been honest.
My line is it's not... You shouldn't tolerate any of that.
But where? Well, what? Any of what? Because...
That behaviour. People, the groping and things.
Yeah, it isn't difficult to understand, is it? Whatever colour your undercrackers are, no one is allowed to touch you.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. 100%.
And quite a lot of women are getting in touch with sort of experience of these sort of dress requirements. To say it's a presentation thing, it's the same as not wanting a white bra underneath a black dress. Not abnormal for there to be uniform requirements in the hospitality industry. I'll take your word for that, Natalie. I don't necessarily see why your undercrackers would be part of that requirement. What was the worst thing that happened when you did that, Tony?
What's stepping in?
Did anyone ever take a swing at you, or, I mean...
No. I'm slightly taller and a bit wider than most people, most men, so you just gave them the look.
See,
and that was it.
I asked you that because Matt tweeted while I was talking earlier to say, what do you mean you have to be blokey to call out sexual assault? That wasn't what I meant at all. What I meant was, and I'm glad you gave the answer that you did, that if a man is contemplating or conducting this kind of behaviour, you're probably going to have more success talking to him in terms and language that he recognises and uses himself, rather than if you start talking about intersectionality and the female eunuch.
No, you just give him a dirty look.
That's my man. Not for the first time. My friend Natasha Devon puts into words some of the things that I've been trying to articulate. She tweets, my take on the President's Club and people who think that women knew what they were getting into, or Christine, our earlier caller, describing it as being a choice taken by women. Natasha writes, it's insulting to the majority of men. Most men I know wouldn't think that women were giving them a green light for sexual assault, no matter what they were wearing. Assault is not inevitable. And she's absolutely right. You know, you could come into my studio dressed like Princess Leia in the opening scenes of The Empire Strikes Back. You could be wearing a ridiculous bikini and a massive chain around your neck leading all the way to Jabba the Hutt, and I wouldn't think that you were inviting me to touch you anywhere. And look at Donald Trump. I think we use him as the example of the kind of man that behaves like this. He wasn't suggesting that women were dressing in a certain way that gave him a green light to sexually assault them. He was suggesting that his fame and power gave him the right to grab them by the trump. And that's the point. But I'm glad that Christine and I parted as friends, although I don't feel that she necessarily fully appreciated what it was she was saying, which was sort of loosely put, an identical conversation to the one that we had last week with the woman defending headscarves, niqabs for girls under the age of 8, and this notion of modesty, and this notion that if women don't take measures to, quotes, protect themselves, or to, quotes, Christine, take responsibility, then they've only got themselves to blame if men behave in a certain way. So it is the logic of the burqa. And yet I imagine that Christine thinks that she's passionately opposed to things like the burqa. You see, this is what I mean. This is my new thing. Just treat everyone the same and judge behaviours, not backgrounds. So if you're a Muslim woman and you get very cross with me when I say that the whole rationale for wearing a veil or wearing a headscarf is misogynistic, even though you think you're exercising free choice, you're just like Christine, saying that the women at this party getting molested had somehow chosen to be molested by agreeing to a uniform code that specified their knickers had to be black. It's the same. And yet we're in this weird place now. And it's profoundly Trumpian, and it is a little bit racist in a way, but it's also misogynistic, and it's also forgivable, because as we've seen from Twitter today, and as we heard with the lad last week who used to be in the EDL, and as we've seen in Germany this morning with the AfD politician who's just converted to Islam and quit the party, people change. However deep your hate is and however furious your anger, you can get rid of it. Just ask Yoda. Deborah's in Bolton. Deborah, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, Deborah.
I'm just giving you a little insight into how they could have minimised this for themselves a little bit.
Whoa, we're doing it again. We're really doing it again.
No, listen to me.
Go on.
Right? You do like the sound of your own voice. Anyway, it's a good job you're a radio presenter, because I don't think you'd hack it in the real world. Good gob like that on you.
Joe's in Edinburgh. Joe, what would you like to say? Joe?
Hello?
Joe, what's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, James.
Oh, hang on, I just need to issue an apology. Excuse me one moment, Joe. It was the opening scenes of Return of the Jedi, not The Empire Strikes Back, I think, where Princess Leia was wearing that skimpy gold bikini. Back to the President's Club. What would you like to say?
Well, I'm actually a sexual assault victim myself as a male, and every single person I've been assaulted by was two people, were both women.
Did you report it?
Both times when I was younger, I was actually taken into care because social services were made aware of this by a third party, and then I was subsequently adopted.
Mate, I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry.
Well, I am. It sounds frightful. I'm not sure how you're... I mean, it's a horrible experience, or two horrible experiences. What made you think it would be relevant to the conversation about these hostesses and these men?
I understand. Yeah, I understand. So, okay, so skip forward to when I was 18. I'd recently just finished my basic training in the army. I went to a family member's wedding. They requested I wear my uniform.
Yes.
And we went to the reception, and there was another event going on. It was a hen party. I walked past the door and was physically grabbed and dragged in because they thought I was a stripper. At not one point did anyone ask me, are you a stripper? I found this out afterwards, and they were literally ripping my clothes off. My dad had to grab me and drag me out of there pronto, else something serious, I think, could have happened.
Yes, and I mean, again, that sounds horrible, but...
Yeah.
So you're suggesting that sometimes women can be sexually aggressive as well?
I think there's sexually aggressive people everywhere. It's part of human nature. But
and do you feel that you should have? Do you feel you should have dressed differently to avoid being assaulted in that fashion?
I don't think what I was wearing helped.
No, but so you feel you should have dressed differently, and it was somehow your fault because you were wearing your uniform?
No, it wasn't my fault.
Well,
no.
Well, exactly.
What I'm saying is there's people that are like this everywhere.
Precisely, and the only people who are responsible for their behaviour are them, not you. You're not responsible for the behaviour of those women.
No, not at all, no. But to go back to the other caller where you said that people should be, or sexual assault victims should be responsible for their attackers, yes. I think what she was trying to say is that you have a responsibility to keep yourself safe. I mean, when you leave your house during the day, you lock the door.
So it was your fault that you got molested that night?
No, it wasn't my fault.
You had a responsibility not to walk past that room.
Well, I didn't know that was going to happen at the time.
Oh. Well, that doesn't matter, though, does it?
But...
And also, you had a responsibility not to dress in that outfit that you think might have contributed to their motivation. So you are saying it was your fault you got molested.
No, I'm not saying that. No, you're saying that.
Well, you're saying you could have taken more responsibility for your behaviour and then it wouldn't have happened to you.
Maybe I could have done. Maybe I could have done something different.
See, I just think it's their fault.
At the time.
I just think it's their fault. But you're perfectly entitled to think it was your fault. Sam's in Raleigh in Essex. Sam, what would you like to say?
It made me question my behaviour as a woman. I'm glad that Joe called in, because before that I was really getting quite cross that it was just that men were awful and only men would do this. I think it's equal. I've been at hen parties, albeit not arranged.
It can't be equal. It can't be equal.
Why can't it be?
I think this is really simple. I may have misunderstood you.
Male rape is so unreported because men should be strong enough, men should be tough enough.
No, there might be some truth in that, but we're talking...
There's huge truth in that.
I take your word for it, but I have never, ever walked the streets of London in fear of being raped or sexually assaulted, and I've never met a woman who hasn't. So that's why it can't be equal. If I go through a subway late at night, I might worry about getting mugged. I don't worry about being penetrated by a man's penis. Do you see why it's not equal?
I think if you look at the statistics, the fear isn't equal, but the actual statistics of rape are quite high for men.
So you're really going to try and tell me that as many men get raped by men in Britain as women do?
I don't know the exact statistics. It's pretty high, though.
Sam, come on, mate.
It is pretty high.
Sam, you're better than this.
We digress. My point was...
We don't digress. We're addressing directly your claim that it's equal. Do you understand now why it couldn't be less equal?
Well, I don't agree.
Okay.
My point is that at hen-dos, I've been there, and on our table, when, you know, these cheeky butler hen nights where the man's in just an apron.
Yes.
And there's no underwear at all. And the women trying to lift up the aprons, having a look. And no, the men didn't appear to be scared. I don't know how they
What would they be scared of?
Thought about my... Wait, that is assault, isn't it? Isn't women grabbing at them the same as what...
No, you didn't say that initially. You said lifting up their apron. But again, what we've got now is this weird situation where if you condemn the sexual assault of women by men, somebody... And this is what I hear from you, Sam, and forgive me if this isn't what you intend. You somehow think that this involves condoning the abuse of men by women. It's all bad. It's all bad.
I do not condone any of it.
So it's all bad.
That made me question my past, because never once did I get up and say, "Don't touch him like that," and I absolutely should have. The same as you said, you might have walked off and wouldn't have said anything.
I'm not. You've probably actually gone further than I have in that case, because in the context of what you describe as a man, I wouldn't feel that he needed protection in the way that I would feel a woman did. Especially if he'd made a conscious decision to do a job that involves having his bits dangling about behind a little waitress's apron. But I wish we had longer, because the idea, and I'm glad we've conducted all of these conversations, except this strange woman in Bolton, with a degree of calmness, because you do believe it's equal, and I can't believe that you believe that.
You have just said exactly what you were cross at Christine, I think her name was, for saying.
We're going to run out of time. I'll bring you back after the news briefly, because we should probably talk about something else, although we may not have to. The world is changing, and some of us are struggling to keep up with the pace of that change. But in my own case, I would try to argue, I think, better late than never. Sam's still on the line, because you said something a minute ago that I think cuts to the absolute heart of this debate, which is that the experience of men in a room full of women, and the example you gave involves a man who doesn't have any trousers or pants on and has his genitals covered with a little apron, which is quite an extreme example. But this notion that it's equal, I find it almost unbelievable impossible to understand. The idea that a woman feels the same as what a man would feel in a situation of sexual threat. I'm 46. I've never been in a situation of sexual threat. So can we just examine that word equal, Sam?
During the break, I had a look, and no, it's not an equal amount of rape. It was something like 80,000 women in the UK reported rape and 15,000 men.
Yes.
Which is still a sizable amount.
But it's less than 20%, but that's not quite what we're talking about. It's the sense, because for me it's all about how a woman feels when she is inappropriately touched, when she's walking through a subway late at night, when she sees a man coming towards her on an empty street. All of these things I've spent my entire adult life not understanding. I just kindly, I think, suggest maybe I don't know, maybe I'm wrong and you're right, and lots of other men do walk around
I just think it's not allowed to be mentioned. Men wouldn't dare say it. I just don't think you would say it.
Well, I would. You know me, Sam. If I was frightened of something, I'd tell you. I'd tell everyone listening.
I think that there is
What sort of scenario do you think a man might feel sexually threatened in?
I don't know. I'm not male, but
But you've just said it's equal. You've described it as identical to being a female.
I didn't say identical.
Well, equal.
I said equal.
Yes.
I don't think it's a gender thing. Are we saying that all men together are... This President's Club thing bothered me terribly.
Yes.
Because it made me think back to going to these nights and thinking, God, I'm completely judging those men, 100% judging those men as disgusting, depraved. However, I sat and allowed that to happen to a man. And yes, you said that man had chosen to put himself in that situation.
No, I didn't.
Now,
he'd chosen not to wear any underpants. Or trousers.
So he'd chosen to do that.
Yes. Now, I would say that you are entitled to look at him, but the minute you try to touch his genitals, you cross a line that bears...
Yeah, absolutely. So why didn't I stop that? That's what it made me question. That was what I first signed up to say.
Yeah.
It made me question my behaviour as a human.
Yeah.
Allowing that to happen. Because I hope I most certainly wouldn't have allowed it to happen to a woman.
Well, that's why I don't think the word equal was the right word to use, because I would be like you. I would feel a lot less troubled in the scenario that you've described than I would at the President's Club. And maybe...
Is that correct?
I don't know. This is what I mean by a work in progress.
I can't feel comfortable with me at all.
Does it not? Well, you're probably more progressive than I am, because I can't... Maybe it's because I'm a bloke. At this point in time...
I'm a counselling student. That's what that'll be.
I can't yet see it as the same, and I'm not sure I ever will.
I've got 3 sons.
Yeah, maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's part of it.
And I worry about them equally. I didn't think I would.
No.
I worry about my daughter walking home late at night, and I worry about my son.
But I could never. Actually, let's use their dad as an example. I could never feel that their dad was in as much potential danger as you would be in identical scenarios.
No, and my husband would agree with you.
Well, that's...
And my boys are rugby playing, big stuff.
And it's not. I mean, the likelihood of it happening is, it's far from negligible, as you remind us. But it's compared to the likelihood of something happening to a woman.
Because so many men do not report it because of the stigma of he should have protected himself. Oh, that can't happen to a man.
Can I ask you a tricky question?
Yeah.
Do you know someone that this has happened to?
Yes.
I thought so. I couldn't... Do you know what happened then, Sam? I couldn't work out...
I won't discuss
No,
it.
I don't want any details at all. I couldn't work out why you kept returning to this specific line. And rather than biting your head off or having a row with you, I just took a moment during the news then to think, why would that be? And that was the theory I came up with.
I feel very strongly about equality.
I bet you do. I bet you... And about that issue in particular as well.
And I particularly felt because our instant reaction, and mine included, when the caller phoned up about he was wearing his army uniform, my first reaction as maybe a bad human was to think, oh, what an idiot to walk past there. Just walk away, pull him away. You're a man, you can do that.
Yeah.
And that's probably why he didn't report that. Now, a woman walking past, being grabbed and dragged by all those men, I really hope that would have been reported.
And yet we're describing a party at which women were routinely experiencing men putting their hands up their skirts uninvited, and a lot of people are ringing me up to excuse it or to suggest that it was somehow their, I would say fault, they would say responsibility. I wouldn't see any difference.
I find it's women that say it's their fault more.
Yes.
And that makes me really sad.
But I know why that is. I worked this out a couple of years ago on the programme. It's a false way of making yourself feel safer. So if women suggest that you only get raped if you're drunk, you only get raped if you wear a short skirt, you only get raped if you go to certain parts of town, you only get sexually assaulted if you sign a non-disclosure agreement specifying the colour of your knickers, you're only going to be a victim of this sort of crime if you behave in a certain way, then I think, and I probably should have been a little bit more generous to Christine on this point, it's a way of reassuring yourself that it can't happen to you, but it can.
How I feel about those women at the President's Club is I would like to know why they were there, why you would choose that, because they must be vulnerable. You know when people say, oh, she was a prostitute, she deserved to be raped. Actually, what made you be in that situation in the first place? They must be vulnerable women. They're not strong, independent women that choose to...
I don't know about... I would argue differently. I'd say they had no idea that was going to happen. And it's a little bit, when it does, it's a little bit rabbit in the headlights. But again, I'm not comfortable. I certainly
don't think they asked for it at all.
No, but
if you're signing about what kind of knickers you are going to wear...
Yes.
...would make my alarm bells ring. And if my daughter came home with a job description that said she had to wear certain kind of knickers... But...
You'd think that was a bit off, but you wouldn't think that she was... putting a sign on her back saying, feel free to molest me. That's the point. That's why I think the knickers could be a bit of a red herring. It's about men behaving disgustingly. It's not really got anything to do... Because here's the thing.
It's not humans behaving disgustingly.
This is where you're a bit further down the road than I am. I'm not sure I'm ever going to get to where you are. Yeah, and I think that's because...
the women at that hen do were behaving in exactly the same way.
And yet I don't think the men would have felt frightened in the same way.
Well, they didn't appear to be, but... How do we know? I don't know.
Well, we'd ask them. We'd ask a Chippendale or a male stripper or a...
I'd love to hear.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear.
Oh, you're putting pressure on me now. I was going to move on to a different subject.
Find a stripper to speak to.
But that's the point. We're talking about strippers and Chippendales and exotic dancers, whereas these young women were waitresses.
Just men, they were waiters. And their job was...
Yeah, but they were waiters who had their meat and 2 veg out, weren't they, Sam?
Well, covered by an apron, you couldn't actually see anything at all.
You could see their buttocks.
That doesn't mean you could see their buttocks, but it doesn't mean I was allowed to. I didn't, but I'll be allowed to lift up their apron and look. Same as I couldn't lift up a girl's skirt on the train and look under her skirt.
No, as I say, you're schooling me on this because I would now argue with you that the man was kind of inviting people to do that and I don't.
That's what Christine said.
Yeah, I appreciate that, which is why I objected initially to your suggestion that men and women were around with these women are not a small scrap of cloth covering their genitals and their buttocks on full display. So
because they were showing more they deserve.
You see what you're doing? You're taking me to school, but I still feel the way I feel, that it's profoundly different as you describe it. I really do. And I don't think that you will be as frightened for your sons as you will be for your daughters as they move into...
I am.
Okay, well,
mine 2 are 15 and 16, and it's my feelings are equal.
You're right. I take that back because I'd forgotten that other little exchange that we had. And of course
I do worry. It hasn't happened to my children.
No, I know it hasn't, but it's happened to someone you know.
I think I worked with problem teens and I work in mental health, and I think you see more. And the more you see, the more educated you become. 10 years ago, I would have been completely on your side, possibly a little on Christine's.
Yeah, I get it.
The older I get, I'm 35 now, the older I get, the more you see, the more you learn, the more you see the damage that happens, and
you're so right.
You don't read about.
You're so right. So in 20 years, do you think we will be looking back?
Oh, I hope so.
But from the male perspective and talking about women... Because at the moment, all of the people saying, what about hen nights? They're not doing it. This is why I misunderstood you at the beginning, because all the people saying, what about hen nights? Or what about women doing it to men? They're trying to claim that both are fine. What you've called me to suggest is that both are awful, and that's what I got wrong at the beginning of this call.
Yeah, but I think both are wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm...
That's it. So I think you're wrong.
My behaviour.
Yeah, no, you're brilliant. You're brilliant. Can I read you a couple of the tweets that have come in while you've been on air?
Yeah.
Because they're directed at me, but really this is mostly about you. What a conversation on LBC and a female caller exploring sexual assault in the President's Club. Proper radio. Give yourself credit. You get to a lot of places that you never thought you would. It's all about power for the man over the... here you go. And then some that are too complimentary even for me to read out. It's all about power for the man over the woman. That power imbalance, for the most part, doesn't exist the other way around, which makes it different. I still believe that, but you've made me question my beliefs.
So can I just say, and I don't agree with it, you know the thing about Friends at the moment, it was very sexist.
Yes.
Millennials are looking back. When Rachel employs Tag purely because he's beautiful and she wants him, she then drapes over the desk.
Yes.
That is sexual assault. I love Friends, and I think it was taking it way too far. But I love that millennials are looking at that thinking...
You and I, mate. This is brilliant. My 11-year-old schooled me on this as well because she thinks it's silly, and she goes a little bit further because Rachel did hire him just because he's gorgeous, but he was also a brilliant nanny. My kid gets more amused in a disapproving way, but not in a sort of po-faced way, about the fact that Ross doesn't want him because he's a man. So you've got all sorts of dimensions going on there, and just like you say, the fact that these younger people can talk about it and recognise it, for us, or for me at least, it's like pulling teeth, but they get there in the blink of an eye.
Yeah, because they're taught differently. They know, I just love the things they come out with. My son is 15, he came home yesterday and he said, I had a lesson on sexual consent today at school. Yeah. They told me about a cup of tea, and I just love that that is what they're learning now.
Brilliant way of doing it.
I don't want my children, as same as I don't want my daughter damaged or to damage anyone, I don't want my any girl damaged at the hands of my sons, and I don't want my sons damaged at the hand of anyone either. If my son was taken on for work experience by a 55-year-old woman who didn't even look at his CV. This is what happened in Friends, isn't it? Didn't even look at the CV, and I would be questioning it the same as I'd be questioning my daughter going into an office with a 55-year-old man.
Yeah, then you are further down this road than I am. I look forward to joining you.
I respect the way you have taken on the conversation.
Well, thank you for being patient with me, Sam.
That's okay.
It's 11:60.